two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them, and bowed himself with his face to the earth, and said, "My lords, please turn aside to your servant's house, and spend the night, and wash your feet. Then you may rise up early and go on your way." They said, "No, we will spend the night in the town square." But he pressed them strongly, so they turned aside to him, and entered his house. And he made a feast, and baked them unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man, surrounded the house. And they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us, that we may know them." Lot went out to the men at the entrance, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have two daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they said, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came to sojourn, and he has become the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with him." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot, and drew near to break the door down. But the men reached out their hands, and brought Lot into the house with them, and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the entrance of the house, both small and great, so that they wore themselves out, groping for the door. Then the men said to Lot, "Have you anyone else here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in this city? Bring them out of this place, for we are about to destroy this place, because the outcry against its people has become great for the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it." So Lot went out and said to his sons-in-law, who were to marry his daughters, "Up, get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city." But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. As morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, "Up, take your wife and your two daughters who are here, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." But he lingered. So the men seized him and his wife and his two daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and set him outside the city. And as they brought them out, one said, "Escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away." And Lot said to them, "Oh no, my lords. Behold, your servant has found favor in your sight, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot escape to the hills, lest the disaster overtake me and I die. Behold, this city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved." He said to him, "Behold, I grant you this favor also, that I will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Escape there quickly, for I can do nothing till you arrive there." Therefore the name of the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities, in all the valley, and all the inhabitants of the cities, in what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. And Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord. And he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and toward all the land of the valley. And he looked, and behold, the smoke of the land went up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the valley, God remembered Abraham and Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had lived. Now Lot went up out of Zoar, and lived in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, "Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth who come in to us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she arose. The next day the firstborn said to the younger, "Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father." So they made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger arose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose. Thus both daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The first bore a son and called him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and called him Ben-ammi. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, Genesis 19. When we decided, I don't know, whenever it was that we were going to preach through Genesis, this was one of the chapters that immediately came to mind when we said, "Are we sure?" Just honestly, this is a hard chapter. It really is in the reading of it. It's a hard text to read. It's a hard text to listen to being read. It's a hard text to preach. It's a hard text to preach with kids in the room. It's a hard preach to text without kids in the room. And so, if you hadn't read it before just now, you potentially are reeling just a little bit, trying to figure out how we can see God here at all, or how or why this is even in the Bible. There's some extremely heavy stuff in this text, but know that this is all in God's Word for the sake of God's glory and for the good of His people. At the very least, we can say that. We can know that going into our time. This is for the sake of God's glory and for the good of His people. Last time we were in Genesis, last week in Genesis 18, just coming out of that, we saw God had come to Abraham and said that He was about to destroy the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. In that chapter, we watched Abraham experience closeness with God in such a way that allowed him to plead for the city of Sodom. And he asked this question of God. He said, "Will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" It's going to be a fairly important question as we walk throughout this text. And with that, I want to draw your attention to two other verses from the New Testament. This will be on the screen for you from 2 Peter chapter 2. I want you to see this on the front end because there will be times today that it will seem as though there is no one righteous to find in this whole text, that there's no righteousness happening. And so we need to see this on the front end. 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 7 and 8 says this, "And if He, God, rescued righteous Lot, greatly distressed by the sensual conduct of the wicked, for as that righteous man lived among them day after day, he was tormenting his righteous soul over their lawless deeds that he saw and heard." This is the New Testament about this situation. In our reading of this text today, you know how it ends, right? We have seen it all already. Know how it ends, that God would be rescued, or that Lot would be rescued by Lot from the destruction. And it doesn't seem like he really deserves it. Guess what? He doesn't. He doesn't deserve it. And that is really the whole point of this text, and the reality is everything that we do. As we get started today, we need to acknowledge that we have some pretty awful and disgusting behavior happen in this chapter, and we are tempted to write everything off here in this situation and assume that there's no way that God could ever be at work in this. And I just want to tell you this today and encourage you with this today, that this story that we see currently is, could be, or should be your story. It either currently is, could be, or should be your story. That you may have walked in here today having already experienced rescue from God that you don't deserve through salvation in Jesus. That you, not deserving it, nothing righteous within you, have already received salvation and rescue from God through what Jesus has done. Or you came in here today not in relationship with Jesus yet, but that God will save you one day. And I just pray that today would be the day. I'm just confident that today is the day of salvation for you. And so if you're in here and you have not experienced salvation in Jesus, that today would be the day that you would experience this could be situation. That I could be rescued even though I don't deserve it. Or you're living a life that will experience the way that you're living, and you will continue living until you die one day, a life that will experience the destruction that is deserved your sin. That this story either currently is, could be, or should be your story is the reality. We see all of this in the text and in our lives. We'll see all of this come throughout our time today, but most importantly, what we're going to see is God's continued faithfulness to His plan and His continued faithfulness to His people no matter what happens. And that brings us this morning to our take-home truth. There's just one statement we give you to let you know where we're headed and where we've been today is this. Humanity's continued sin will not prevent God's continued faithfulness. Humanity's continued sin will not prevent God's continued faithfulness. So let's, as we go into this time, pray and lay ourselves before Him, asking that as He speaks, we'll listen. So let's pray. God, I thank You for this morning that we can gather around Your Word, that we've been able to gather and sing in worship to You these songs that remind us of who You are and what You've done. And God, now I pray that we are prepared through that time that we've had already, that You've prepared our hearts to be fertile ground for our time in Your Word today. God, even in chapters like these, we know that You are good, and You are righteous, and You are just, and You will speak. So God, when You speak this morning, will You give us ears to hear what it is You have to say? Would You help us to see Your salvation work through Jesus in this text? Would You cause us to be challenged, convicted of sin? As we're convicted of sin, would You cause us to repent of that sin, to turn away from that sin, and instead turn to You? God, I pray that You would work a story of salvation in our midst today, that someone who is far from You, who is walking around a dead person separated from You, that they would be made alive together with Christ today. Oh God, we pray that that would be true. And for those who have already been made alive, would You help us not to just tune all of this out as if we don't need it? God, would You help us to see areas of our life that we are straying, that we are allowing ourselves to sit in sin, so much so that it might even take over our lives and our families. So God, would You cause change to happen in our lives, that we would walk out of here, most of all, more like Jesus. We ask all this in His strong name. Amen. All right, so in the last chapter of Genesis 18, 3 men came to Abraham and had a conversation with him about Sodom, and Abraham has prayed to God for Sodom. And then the 2 other men, we now find out in this text in chapter 1, or in verse 1 of chapter 19, they're angels, continue on toward the city. God would have them to go and investigate the city, to see if the sin of the city is as bad as the outcry says that it is. So they come to Sodom and they see, sitting at the gate, Abraham's nephew. Don't forget that they're related. Abraham's nephew, Lot. I'm going to remind us again here of what we read in 2 Peter chapter 2. There's going to be much in Lot's interactions here and life in Sodom that seems to go against the fact that God says that Lot is righteous. This isn't going to make a lot of sense on the surface. So just keep in mind that there are times that the righteous person can get caught up in the temptation to sin. There are times that the righteous person gets caught up not in the temptation, but giving into sin. That there are no perfect people. That we could look at this and we could judge Lot, when the reality is that all Christians have the opportunity and ability at different times to get comfortable around sin, to fall into sin, and to dwell in sin for a time. This is why our take-home truth is so important, that the righteousness of Lot and the righteousness of all Christians is not dependent on anything the follower of God can do. The righteousness of us is not dependent on anything in us. That even though Lot was living among sin, God's promise is still sure that there's nothing that anyone could possibly do, no good deed or awful sin, not one thing can change the plan of God to do what is just and right to keep His promises. So they come to Sodom and they find Lot, sitting at the gate of the city, the focal point of activity within a city. And when Lot sees them, notice what he does. Very similar to Abraham in the last chapter. He rises to meet them and bows down to the earth. He has a recognition at the very least that these are not ordinary visitors for him. He says to them, please turn aside and come to my house and spend the night and wash your feet. Extremely hospitable at this moment as he welcomes these men in. But notice here that a change has happened. In Genesis chapter 13, back there, we saw Lot begin to live around Sodom in a tent. Okay, so don't miss that. He was around Sodom in a tent. Okay, and now he's become a part of the community as he's purchased a home there in the community. He's committed himself to living among these wicked people. He has slowly moved himself into a deeper part of this sinful community. But he invites them to his house to spend the night so they can rise up early and be on their way. Notice that he having no assumption that they could possibly be there to do anything about Sodom. But Lot also knows, in inviting them to stay the night and then leave early, that there is something wrong or shameful about Sodom. He wants these men to have no interaction with the people that live in his city, especially as the angels suggest that they'll just sleep in the town square. Notice that they say, no, we'll just sleep in the square. That's fine. But Lot presses them strongly, even physically, to turn them aside to his house. He knows what the people of Sodom are like, and he wants the angels to have no interaction with them. So the angels are ushered into Lot's house, where he makes them a feast that's similar to Abraham's feast that he makes them in the last chapter. The only difference, again, we see unleavened bread here. It's also an indication that this is a hurried preparation. He wants this night to be over as quickly as possible so that they'll go to sleep and leave. But, verse 4 says, before they could lay down, the men of the city come to Lot's house. Notice the descriptions in these verses. We see the men twice. We see young and old. We see all the people to the last man. Remember back in Genesis chapter 13, verse 13, that told us the men of Sodom were very wicked and sinful, and they live up to that description. All of these descriptions that we see should show us that the whole city is in fact wicked. And that is not going to come true that there would be, as Abraham requested, 10 righteous people in Sodom to save the city. And if it weren't enough to just say that the culture of Sodom was wicked and sinful, we're given a description of what things are like here in verse 5 of our text. The men surround Lot's house and they call out to Lot. They say, "Where are the men that came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them." Right here, we see a public display of sinfulness for all to see as they're just shouting this out in the streets. And it may not seem, even with this sentence, if you don't have an understanding of what these words mean, that this is even a big deal. But what are these men desiring out of Lot? They want Lot to bring these men out so that they can use and abuse them in a way that is completely opposed to every part of a godly, intimate human relationship. It's all opposite. This word that the men use when they say they want to know these visitors is the same word that's used in Genesis chapter 4, verse 1, that is used to describe the marriage relationship that results in reproduction. Okay, so these men are desiring to perform what God says of their interaction later in the book of Ezekiel in chapter 16. God describes this as an act of abomination against the fellow man, more specifically. And as clearly as I'm willing to put it this morning, that they desire to participate in sexual activity with other men for their own gratification and pleasure. Y'all with me? I can't go further. Lot hears this demand from the men of the city. And to shield his visitors from outside threat, Lot goes out to the men and shuts the door behind him. And then he speaks to them. We see him begin to bargain with these men. First, he begs them. He refers to them as his brothers. Like, don't miss even that part. Oh, my brothers. Lot is a part of this community. He begs them, though, to not act so wickedly. From what we understand about that passage in 2 Peter, this is not new behavior that Lot is experiencing from the men of the city. He dealt with it day after day. And so he doesn't even call for the men to not act wicked at all. He's not saying don't act wicked. He's just saying don't act so wickedly. A true mark of a culture that's been given itself over to sinful behavior, it's almost as if he's just saying tone it down just a little bit tonight. Don't act so wickedly. And what we see next in Lot's actions could bring about all kinds of emotions for us. I don't know how many times I read this week, but even emotions that were different for me this week when Anna read it, when I heard someone else read it out loud. Things like anger and disgust, among many other emotions that we could experience. Here Lot does what, he doesn't agree with the demands of the men. Right? He does not agree to these demands. He'll not allow the men to have his visitors, but in not agreeing with their demands, he does not resist their desires. Don't miss that. He doesn't agree to their initial demands, but he does not disagree with their desires. Instead of his visitors, he says, I have 2 daughters. I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you so that you can do to them as you please. Just don't touch my guests. Now, before we go super far down this road with Lot's action, I want to be I want to put a possibility out here for you. But before I even do that, I cannot stress this enough. That what Lot has done here is not okay and it is not right. You hear that? Like, this is not okay what he's done. So before anything else that I say after this, no, this is not okay what is happening. Offering up his daughters to be taken advantage of by these men. Whatever reason he had, it doesn't make any of what he does right. He should not have done this. But the reality is that at the time there was a law that was in place that stated if men were caught having lain with a woman who was engaged to be married, then the man would be put to death. So Lot's strategy in this moment very well could have been a legal one, to try to bring them to their senses by offering his daughters who were engaged to be married to these men. Again, even if that's the case, he should have never done this to his daughters. Never should have happened. On top of that, Lot's trying to reason with the unreasonable, as we're about to see. Verse 9 in our text, their answer to Lot is absolute no. Stand back, they say. This man, Lot, he came to sojourn, and now he's become a judge. Now we'll deal worse with you than with them. Their intent is to do harm to someone on this night to satisfy their desires and sinful appetite. And there doesn't seem to be any stopping them from getting them what they want. They pressed hard against Lot and drew near to break his door down. And in that moment, verse 10 says, the men, or the angels that were inside, reached out to save Lot by bringing him in the house and shutting the door. And then the angels then strike the men, small and great, all of them, the men of the city, with blindness so that they would wear themselves out, groping at the door. It's exactly what happens when someone is so deep in their sin. These men were physically blinded because of their sin, which had already spiritually blinded them. And they wanted to sin so bad because they were so engulfed in it that they groped for the door in desperate frustration because they just could not fulfill their sinful desires. Now we, in that moment, make a slight transition, even in the text in verse 12, as the men have worn themselves out. Just think about that. They wanted to sin so badly. They wanted to take advantage of someone so badly that they used up all the energy they could groping at this door. Please let me in to violate someone because I need it. I need to fuel my sinful passion. So much so that they have worn themselves out and cannot even be bothered. That's how tired they are, working and striving to sin. Verse 12. The angels speak to Lot and begin to warn him. Give him opportunity now to escape the judgment of the city. They ask if there's anyone else living in his home. Sons-in-laws, sons, daughters, anyone that Lot has in the city. The angels say, whoever is yours, get them out of this place. Why? Well, they've seen all they need to see. As they tell Lot that they're in Sodom, or why they're in Sodom in verse 13. They're about to destroy the city, just as they had told Abraham, because the outcry against the city is great and accurate. So verse 14 tells us that Lot listens to the warning given to him, and he goes to the men that were there to marry his daughters. With urgency and seriousness, he says to his future sons-in-laws, up, get out of this place. The Lord is about to destroy the city. And their reaction, the end of verse 14, he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting or joking, just playing around. Why did they feel this way? Why didn't they believe Lot? There was a lack of seriousness taken with their lives and with the sin that they were involved with in Sodom. And because of that, rescue and escape seemed completely unnecessary for the people. And so I would simply ask you this question. Do you take seriously the reality of judgment that will come for sin? Do you take seriously the reality that judgment will come for sin? I ask that in two different ways. First of all, for yourself. If you're in the room and you are currently just separated from God, you have never trusted Jesus, you're not a follower of Jesus, would you just consider this for a moment? This may not make a lot of sense to you, but our sin, as bad as we think what we're reading is, our sin is just as bad. Because the reality is we're created by a holy God who is perfect and righteous, and our actions against him are heinous. They're unholy, unrighteous, the complete opposite of who he is, no matter what it is you've done. So we see toward the end of this text the reality of judgment that's come upon this city, and that's not even the worst that it can get. That's physical death, but the reality is our sin has earned us physical and spiritual death. Spiritual death, being separated from God for all eternity, and the judgment and the wrath of God poured out on you because of your sin, just like we'll see in this text. Do you understand and take seriously that this is your reality if you live today separated from God? Do you take that with seriousness? Or are you in the camp of Lot's son-in-law that just assumes that this is just a joke? That this isn't real? There's no need for change in my life. Everything's fine. I don't need God to rescue me or for me to escape this potential destruction that Lot's talking about. No. Have you considered the reality that judgment will come for your sin? And if so, if you've considered that and you've not turned to Jesus yet, why are you so okay with that coming judgment for you? If you've considered it and you still remain separated from God, I'm assuming that you don't quite understand it. To understand the deserved wrath coming for you because of your sin against God. And to know that there is escape that's been told to you through Jesus, and to not take the escape. To not receive this escape from God that he's given to you, you don't quite understand what's coming. So have you considered and do you take seriously the reality that judgment is coming, and the reality that you can turn from that judgment today, even now? I pray that that happens for you. But also, have you considered that judgment is coming for others, Christians in the room? Do you live your life in such a way that judgment is coming for those who don't yet know Jesus? Or are you just okay that you made it? I escaped. I don't care about anybody else. Christian, that cannot be so. It cannot be so that you are not considering the fact that judgment is coming for all of those that you know who don't yet know Jesus. The call for you, Christian, is simple: to make Jesus known and to make the escape opportunity known to those around you. Have you considered and do you take this seriously? Lot's been warned. Others have been warned. And even in this moment, you have been warned and called to rescue. So let's see what happens next. Verse 15. Morning comes and the angels urgently speak to Lot. They say, "Up, take your wife and your daughters, lest you be swept away in the punishment of the city." The angels tell Lot again that he and his family are in danger, and they say that the danger is the punishment of the city. If you're taking notes in some way, find this word punishment interesting in how it's translated. The original word for punishment means sin. So it's translated this way because the earliest Hebrews did not believe that you could separate the ideas of sin and punishment, that they're one and the same. So the angels are saying to Lot that he must escape the sin and punishment of the city. Now this seems urgent. It seems like a sure thing. So Lot leaves in this moment, right? He doesn't. In this section, one of the most painful sentences that we read is the beginning of verse 16. But he lingered. In the original writings in Genesis, there's a marking that's put after this sentence that means that the reader should pause to reflect. That Lot has been warned, and then he lingered, pause. He's been warned much and is in agony day after day over the sin of Sodom. These angels, on behalf of God, tell Lot to get out of town because it's about to be destroyed, but Lot lingers and he hesitates. Why the lingering around Sodom? It's hard for Lot to abandon the familiar to follow the truth. It's hard for him to abandon the familiar to follow the truth in faith. There's something here that's difficult in trusting God's deliverance when it means that we must flee our comfortable, sinful surroundings. Lot has built a life in this place and looks around, lingering and deciding if it's really worth it to leave it all behind to trust God's warning call. And in this lingering, right after this painful sentence, we see something beautiful that the Lord does for Lot and has done for many of us. The angels take Lot and his family by the hand and bring them outside of the city. But what's left out in the middle of that sentence? The angels took his family by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they take him out of the city. You know what the definition of mercy is? Not receiving what you actually deserve. Not receiving what you actually deserve. This man and his family were rescued by the hand of God, literally, because of the mercy of God in spite of Lot's lingering self. Even outside of the city, they're not safe, though. The angel has removed Lot and his family from what has caused the hesitation to leave, but now the angel gives a very specific command in verse 17 that will come into play in just a little while. Escape for your life. Here it is. Don't look back or stop anywhere, or you will be swept away. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere. You'll be swept away. Lot begins to bargain even then about where he's going to escape to. He recognizes that he has found favor with God. Here it is. Remember that? Favor and righteousness, giving a glimpse of what God has made and found Lot to be righteous. He's found favor with God in verse 19. He says here that he cannot escape to the hills because disaster would overtake him. Verses 20 through 22, we have Lot saying here that he could, or where he could escape to. He wants this little city near enough for him to flee to. Lot he just cannot quite simply leave this area that he's called home, and so he wants to go to this city called Zoar. A city, if you think back and read back in Genesis 14, a city whose king fought alongside the king of Sodom in a battle against Abraham. This should help us to see that Lot would want to remain in a city that is at least similar to Sodom. He wants something similar. So the angel grants his favor to Lot, but says that the escape needs to be quick because he cannot begin the destruction of Sodom until he gets there. So Lot finally moves on, as we see in the beginning of verse 23. The sun rises and Lot comes to Zoar. Verse 25 says that the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord. Moses writes in such a way, repeating the Lord twice in that verse to reinforce the truth that ultimate judgment, ultimate punishment for sin belongs to God and God alone. The Lord has done it. God brings about this consequence for the sin of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. No one else. It's God. God has overthrown these cities. Verse 25 says, this word overthrew gives the definition of completeness in this destruction. It is all done. The verse says that all of the valley, all the people, all that grew on the ground, everything is gone. And now we get to why this instruction from the angel to not turn back is so important. Verse 26 says this, but Lot's wife, who was behind him, looked back at Sodom, and she became a pillar of salt. Lot's wife continued to desire what she had left behind, even likely feeling sorrow over the fact that she had to leave her sin-filled city. And in this sorrow looks back, longing for the place she left, and disobeys the serious command not to turn back, and she dies, becoming a pillar of salt. This brings about the idea of complete desolation and lack of life. She experiences the same fate as the city that she longed to be a part of. Now the text makes another turn and shifts itself back to Abraham. In verse 27, we last saw him after he prayed for the rescue of Sodom. And so he goes here to see the result of God's findings in Sodom. He looks down and sees that there's smoke coming up from the land, effectively showing Abraham that there could not be 10 righteous people found in the city to save the city. And we don't even know for sure if Abraham ever knew that Lot made it out. Like we talked about it last week, that the potential prayer for him was just on behalf of his family member, Lot. And he likely won't even know if he made it out. In the middle of all this, he doesn't even know that. And now we come to this final part of Genesis 19. If you thought you were going to get a breather from sin in this text, think again. In this last account of Lot in the book of Genesis, and the reality is this is the last that we really see of Lot in the Old Testament. We see what happens when all you know is sin in your life. Lot goes up out of the city of Zoar and lives in the hills with his daughters. He was afraid to live in the city that he has to go to. The reason isn't listed here, but it could be that he was afraid that he would be associated with the destruction of Sodom and the people would not want him around. And so Lot and his daughters will instead live in a cave in the hills. Verse 31, we begin to see the result of a few things here. Isolation and boredom always open the door to temptation to sin. Figure out what they do there. They isolate themselves from everybody. We see that the daughters are bored. Isolation and boredom will always open the door to temptation to sin. And the fact that Lot had raised his daughters in the city of Sodom and not in the ways of God are really going to show here. My commentaries this week all use some version of this statement when talking about Lot's daughters. You can take the daughters out of Sodom, but not the Sodom out of the daughters. They've not been led well by their father. Been allowed to grow up around normalized sin and normalized disobedience to God. And because of that, it seems normal to them to come up with the plan that we're about to look at. In an assumption on their part that the entire earth is actually destroyed based on what they saw in Sodom. The older daughter says that there are no men on the earth to marry and have children with, and our dad is old. Verse 32. She says they should make their father drink wine and lie with him to preserve offspring from Lot. This is obviously a normal thought for her, unfortunately. Verse 33 tells us that they made Lot drink wine that night, and the older sister went in to lay with her father in much the same way that the men of Sodom wanted to know the visiting angels. Lot was apparently so intoxicated that he didn't even know when his daughter came in or left. If that were not enough, the very next day the daughters do the same thing to and with their father. So they repeat the process, and the younger daughter goes in to lay with Lot. And again, he did not know when she came in or left. Thus, verse 36 says, both of Lot's daughters became pregnant by their father, Lot becoming both father and grandfather to his offspring. There is much at work here. And so just a few things to reflect on with this story. First of all is this. Enough alcohol to get you drunk is never a good thing. See it here. We can talk about the use of alcohol in the life of a Christian another time, but hopefully you can see this. Lot is so intoxicated that he doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't know that he is having improper contact with his daughters. He is so intoxicated. And it happens not once, but twice, 2 days in a row. The next thing to just think about here is that sinners are going to sin. I'll not make excuse for what Lot's daughters do here. It's disgusting and it's wrong. At the same time, I can look at this and have no surprise when I read it. We say it often, sinners going to sin. It's just reality. Why would we expect those whose lives have been surrounded by and engulfed with sin to do anything other than sin in this kind of way? And third, consider this, that Lot did not lead his family well. I just think this gives us an opportunity to recognize the desperate need specifically for men to lead well in their lives and in their homes. Look at the history of Lot. He lives in Sodom, his choice. A righteous man, daily frustrated by the sin around him. He allows his family to live there. He raises his daughters among sin in Sodom, allowing them to be around sin, essentially unprotected spiritually. As they flee from Sodom, Lot is not with his wife as she longs for the sinful place and turns back, disobeying the direct command from God that was given to them. They arrive in Zoar, but Lot isolates their family to a cave and then puts no boundaries around his family as he opens himself and his daughters up to extreme sinful behavior because the daughters know nothing different. Men, do you understand how important it is that you lead and lead well your spouse, your family, and those around you in the ways of the Lord? Do you understand it? It's either the ways of the Lord or the ways of the world as we see here. There's not going to be an in-between where you can just relax. Either you will lead them to the Lord or you'll give them to the world. Lot is considered a righteous man according to Scripture. Even though he's righteous, his daughters are not, because we see a major lack of spiritual leadership in Lot. Men, specifically, you must lead to the Lord. You may not think so, but it is this serious. It is this serious. To ignore the spiritual lives of yourself, your spouse, those around you, and your children. It says, I don't care what happens to them. The world can have them. So what's the result of these sinful interactions? It's children. The older daughter gives birth to a son named Moab, which literally means from the father or from dad. The younger sister gives birth to a son named Benami. That's what we decided, right? Benami, which means son of my kinsman. Both of these children will be fathers to enemies of God's people, the Moabites and the Ammonites. They will be a constant in opposition to God's people throughout all of history. And if you've come this far and you think, I knew it, I knew there was no way to see the glory and goodness of God in this chapter of Scripture. I knew it. Proved him wrong. I want to help you see that even with all of the sinfulness that we've just seen, there is a glimmer of hope. There's a glimmer of hope in this story of redemption that God is writing. The Moabites, yes, they will be an enemy of God's people, but there will come a day way off in the future from this that there will be a Moabite woman who is born that hears of God and becomes a devout follower of God, the very one that her own people opposes. The Moabites are conceived in a sinful way, but Moab becomes the ancestor of a woman named Ruth, who follows God into a relationship with a descendant of Abraham named Boaz. And Ruth then will become the great-grandmother of King David. And if you know anything about the history of our Savior, that King David is the however many greats grandfather of Jesus. I love what my commentary said here as we end our time in God's Word about this situation. It just said this: the rebellion of Lot's family produces a son, whose clan would eventually raise up a Moabite woman, whose lineage would produce the Messianic son. That son that we know as Jesus would be the one to destroy the power of sinful rebellion that ensnared Lot's daughters in Genesis 19 and grips each one of us who are outside of Christ. The cave of Moab's conception, therefore, points ahead to the tomb of the Messiah's resurrection. God works through the brokenness of what happened in the cave to prepare the way for the one who rescues us from our own brokenness. That brings us this morning back to our take-home truth, that humanity's continued sin will not prevent God's continued faithfulness. Just overwhelmed right now. Just thinking about what God did in spite of sinful people. And then thinking about my life and what He's done in spite of me. That He would love me, the unlovable. That He would care for me in such a way that He would give of Himself to live for me in a way that I could never live to please Him. To then die for me when He didn't deserve it and I do. To shed His blood as a sacrifice for me. And not only that, but then to resurrect from the dead, to come back to life, to never die again, and to ascend into heaven, to sit at God's right hand, to plead for me who would one day trust in that work. He's done it for you. That this is true is crazy. It doesn't make any sense that this is true. That despite your sin, God's faithfulness to you doesn't stop. to prepare to respond, and we're not going to worry about response questions or reflection. This is what we must reflect on. The fact that our continued sin will not prevent God's faithfulness to us. So in this moment, as we prepare to respond, we're to respond by singing, out of response for what God has done, and what we see even in the midst of this kind of chapter, what God continues to do. If you're a Christian in the room, I pray that you are able to reflect in this craziness to say, this craziness is mine too. And even though this has happened in my life, sin has happened in my life, God has remained faithful to me. And I can celebrate in this moment what God has done. And if you are not yet a follower of Jesus, I would hope and pray that you have seen this morning that you are not too far from God for Him to save you. That there is nothing that could stop God from loving you and desiring to save you. So today, if you're not yet following Jesus, won't today be the day that you'll admit and confess that I've sinned before God. I've lived in an offense against God. And yet, God, you love me enough to send Jesus for me. So, God, I can't trust in what I've done, so I'm going to trust in what you've done. God, would you save me from the consequence and punishment of my sin and restore me to yourself? It is that simple. I would never tell you it's easy. In Luke chapter 17, Jesus references this story. He says, remember Lot's wife. Super simple sentence. But what he says is this: the one who would save his life will lose it. The one who loses his life for my sake will find it. Remember Lot's wife. For those who have trusted Jesus, those who are about to trust Jesus, remember Lot's wife. Don't look back. Don't look back at what was. Understand what God has called you to in relationship with Himself. There's no thing in your past worth turning back to. There's nothing. We're going to respond and sing. We're going to respond through praying with one another. If you need to pray with one another, we do that. We're going to respond by going in just a little while, but we're also going to respond during this first song by partaking in the Lord's Supper together. And so during this first song, you'll have the opportunity to get the elements for the Lord's Supper over on the side over here. And then after this first song, we'll partake in the Lord's Supper together as we gather around the table as followers of Jesus to proclaim the death of Jesus until He returns, to proclaim that we've given our whole selves to Him, that we've not turned back. We're not turning back, but we're looking ahead to what God has, what He's given us. So if you're a follower of Jesus in the room, you have followed Jesus in baptism, this is just what we hold to at Rooted. You don't have to be a member of our church, but if you've been baptized following your salvation in Jesus, we would welcome you to partake in the Lord's Supper today with us. And if not, or if there is other sin dwelling in your life that you're not actively fighting against and repenting of, the Bible would tell you very, very clearly to not partake and to refrain today from partaking in the Lord's Supper. This is a serious thing in the Bible, and we take it very seriously here. That those who are coming before God in a worthy manner, not because of anything you've done, but because you've been saved and you're following Jesus, that you will partake. So as you do, remember what Jesus has done. Remember that Jesus remembers you. And if you do not partake this morning, I want to encourage you to look around as this happens. This beautiful example of the gospel around you. And then to go to someone and ask, what has Jesus done in your life? Why did you partake in this? So as we worship, whether you need to stand or sit in response, won't you respond in a way that is honoring to what God has said to you in this moment?